Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, episode number 10. As always, you can reach us at the Drum Shuffle Podcast at gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com. You can find me at jamieeads.com. Want to thank everybody for continuing to reach out to us. We have an absolutely fantastic episode today. We have Aaron Comess from the Spin Doctors, Joan Osborne, you name it, folks. He's played with them. We're going to be talking to Aaron here in just a second, so please stay tuned. Los Cabos drumsticks may be the best kept secret from drummers today. Los Cabos drumsticks makes the finest tools to touch a drummer's hands in the business. The best news, almost every popular stick size is available in both white hickory and red hickory. If you don't know what red hickory is, it's made from the heartwood of the hickory tree, unlike regular white hickory, which is made from sapwood. Red hickory drumsticks will hold up to even the hardest hitting drummers. Their durability comes from the density of the wood, but they do not sacrifice the feel. Please visit LosCabosDrumsticks.com to learn more about their products. And don't forget to ask at your favorite retailer for Los Cabos drumsticks. All right, guys, our guest today is the great Aaron Comess of the Spin Doctors. Aaron has a brand new record out called Sculptures that we're going to talk about here in just 1 second. And I want to wish Aaron a very happy early 50th birthday. And he is celebrating his 50th birthday with a bash at the Blue Note in New York City on April 23rd. It's going to be a big show. So for any of our listeners up in the New York area, go to his birthday party at the Blue Note in New York on April 23rd. Please go check out his new record, Sculptures. It's fantastic. You'll hear us talk about that in just a second. So without any further hesitation, let's welcome Aaron Comess to the Drum Shuffle. Hey, good afternoon, Aaron. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
Man, I'm doing well. Hey, thanks so much for coming on the Drum Shuffle. We really do appreciate it.
Well, happy to be here.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're honored to have you here today. Aaron, what I would like to do, if you don't mind, kind of walk us back to the very beginning. How did you become a drummer?
Well, let's see. Around the age of 5 or 6, I started taking classical piano lessons, and I did that for a while. And then around 9, I just decided I wanted to play drums. I was, really into it. And I basically just asked my parents for lessons. I was like, I really like to play drums. Can you guys get me some lessons? And I really got lucky. They reached out to a music store. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and there was a music store there called Brooke Mays Music. And they just called up the place and said, our son wants to take drum lessons. And there was a guy named Jack Iden who was teaching drums there. And, I couldn't have been luckier to have hooked up with this guy. And so from the age of 9, I started playing. And my very first lesson was basically Jack. First thing he did was showed me how to hold the drumsticks, which is why I play traditional grip. That's the way he taught me. and from the very beginning, we just started in on rudiments. I think the very first day he showed me like the rough and the flam and the 5-stroke roll. I remember he wrote down about 4 or 5 rudiments on this little piece of paper. And basically for the first 2 or 3 years, I just played on a practice pad and eventually got a snare drum and just worked on rudiments, learned how to read music, and just did rudimentary snare drum, pieces. And it was really great. It was really, I just can't thank this guy enough for getting me started that way. And, it's funny because I used to go in there every week and beg him to let me get a drum set. I'd be like, I'd even have my mom come in, and talk to him after the lesson, It's like, hey, he really wants to get a drum set. What do you think? And Jack was just like, you hate me now, but you'll love me later. I really think he's he's going to be a lot better off if we just stick to the snare drum and really get our hands together and get your reading together and get the fundamentals together. And, in a couple of years, after he's been doing this for a couple of years, you get a drum set. And so even though I didn't like the idea, that's what I did. And finally, around the age of 11, I got my first drum set.
Cool. So, so many guys, they don't take your path. They just go out and buy a drum set and start playing along to, Beatles records or Zeppelin records or whatever, So,
yeah.
But you brought up, you pointed out something, anybody that's familiar with your playing knows that you are a traditional grip player, which, is kind of odd. And I think most people know you from your time in Spin Doctors, obviously. Huge band. You guys sold millions and millions of records, but you were kind of the, in terms of that time period, the music that was coming out in the 90s, you didn't see a whole lot of guys on MTV playing traditional grip. So did you grow up in the jazz tradition? Were those your influences growing up, or were you a rock and roll guy as well?
I was both. Like I said, really the reason that I played traditional grip is just because Jack Iden showed me that way, and that's just what I always did. But as far as my background, once I did get a drum set, I found a teacher, and I immediately started studying jazz. I learned how to, with the reading, I was learning how to do big band interpretation, and I was getting exposed to jazz. I was also always just as much into rock, but from an early age, I was kind of equally into music of, I was totally into Zeppelin, of course, and the Beatles and the Who and the Stones and the AC/DC and Sabbath and Van Halen and, all these amazing bands that were around at that time, but at the same time, I was discovering Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Charlie Parker, and I had teachers that were exposing me to that. And I was also lucky enough to have, to play in a big band at school and a small group at school. So, the jazz thing, I was really every bit as much of a jazz drummer as I was a rock drummer, when I was coming up through junior high and high school, and really to this day, So it's just, it's always been kind of it's definitely, certainly jazz is a major influence on my style and, what I love to play and what I love to listen to.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, personally, I love listening to jazz. I can't play it to save my life. You know what I mean? It's just not my thing.
Yeah, I hear you. It's like anything. It's like, it's not easy. Being able to bounce between different styles, and it's something you have to, it's like learning a language. It's a lot of it is listening to, spending a lot of time listening to the different styles of music, and then, understanding them and getting the right touch and realizing the touch is, it's a different touch playing jazz than it is playing like loud rock. But the cool thing is if you study all these different styles and really get into it, you can incorporate all these different things in different styles you're playing. So even though I'm very much the kind of person that likes to be authentic and learn things in an authentic way, I want to be able to play, if I'm playing, let's say, a blues gig. I grew up in Texas, and I used to play a lot of blues gigs. And I really wanted to understand that style. And if I was going to play a shuffle, down in Texas, I wanted to really know how to play a Texas shuffle. It's more than just playing triplets. There's a whole attitude to it, and an authentic. If you want to be authentic with it, you have to study it and listen to it. And the same thing goes with jazz, and same thing goes with rock. I don't want to sound like a jazz drummer playing rock. I don't want to sound like a rock drummer playing jazz. But once you get to a certain point, it's really cool to start mixing all those elements and trying to find your own voice. And that's what it's all about. That's what it's always been about for me, is taking all my different influences with different styles of music and different players and trying to, kind of make my own thing with it,
Sure, absolutely. Well, you've done pretty well with it. We were talking before we went on the air. I think you are up over 200 album credits as a player. Is that right?
Yeah, it's something like that. I have a pretty. If you go on my website, there's I have a partial discography up there. but you know, I don't. You lose track. I mean, and it's funny. Funny. Somebody will say like, "Oh my God, how did you play on 200 records?" But you know, the fact is I'm 49 years old. You know, I've been playing professionally since I was really like 18. You know, and I moved to New York when I was 20. And you know, even though the first 90s, I mean, although I did play on a few records, it was mostly that time was really just fully dedicated to the Spin Doctors. We were making records and we were touring all the time. But since like the late 90s, you know, I started doing a lot of session work and a lot of sideman stuff. And you know, you figure if you play on 10 records a year for 30 years, all of a sudden you got 300 records. You know, so
yeah.
it sounds like a lot, but you know, I'm a guy that's out there, you know, busy. I'm in New York. There's a lot of opportunity here. There's all kinds of people making records, you know, on a high level, and then just stuff that people are doing in home studios. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of the way things are now. There's, you know, it's a lot easier to make a record than it used to be. You know, you don't necessarily have to. It used to be like you either had really rich parents that could pay for expensive studio time, or if you got a record deal and you could go in the studio. But you know, ever since like the late 90s when the home studio thing started happening, it really just opened the doors for people to get really creative and be able to make music for much less money, you know, and get it out there. That's the positive side of it. The negative side of it is that, you know, from a music industry point of view, from a financial point of view, it's definitely gotten very difficult for artists to get paid, you know, which is a real problem. But you know, you got to look at the bright side. I mean, from a creative point of view, I think that, you know, things are really great.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's tons of great music everywhere now. I mean, it's almost, you know, ubiquitous that, you know, everybody has a record out, and you know, you make a really good point. It's easier to get your stuff out there. But you know, your words aren't lost on me that, you know, the artist comes last in the financial standing of the business.
It's just the way things are now. It's just, you know, let's face it, everybody expects to get everything for free now. I mean, with just the way the internet is, and you know, the lack of money that's rolling into the music industry, it's just become difficult. You know, and you know, I feel very fortunate that I was around and the Spin Doctors were around at a time where the music industry was really booming. I mean, the 90s was probably one of the best times in the music business because you had, you know, for one, you had CDs had just been out. CDs came out, like in the late 80s or something.
Mm-hmm.
So CDs were, you had, you know, record companies, people were making cassette CDs, vinyl. People were going back and buying catalog records. Everybody went back and bought like their favorite Zeppelin record or whatever on CD. You know, new bands were selling truckloads of records because you had MTV and you know, it was just really like a really good time. And there was a lot of money in the music industry. And you know, it's always been really hard. I mean, it was competitive and hard to get a record deal, and you hear stories about people getting screwed and all this. But when you compare it to now, I mean, those just seem like the good old days, you know? It's like, I remember people complaining about how f***ed up it was back then, but it's like, man, I mean, we didn't know how good we had it, you know? And these days, you know, just because the fact that people don't buy records, there's just the amount of money that goes into the industry is so low. So it's tough, you know, and I hope that, I try to stay optimistic and hope that it's all about really changing the laws. So musicians and songwriters and artists get money, you know, with this whole streaming thing. It's just set up in such a poor way. It's set up great for the music lover. It's never been a better time because there's more music than ever, and you can get it for either really cheap or free. And the problem is the people that are making the music aren't seeing much. So it's an interesting time, you know, and you know, hopefully we'll figure it out and it'll change for the better. But the good news is, you know, there's so much great young talent, and people just figure out a way to do it. You know, if you really, it's like it's always been. You know, if you really love what you're doing, or you're passionate about what you do, you're going to do it. It's not nobody started playing, you know, or writing songs or playing an instrument to get paid. I mean, I know for me, it's always been about just being the best musician I can and creating really great music. And it's, you know, it's not about the money. I was lucky that I was in a situation or am in a situation where I actually get paid. But I mean, anytime you do something for money, you're making a mistake. It's never, I find that, follow your, do what you want to do, be creative. Don't listen to anybody else. Don't do what people tell you. Those are the things that usually end up doing the best anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, the Spin Doctors is a great example. We did exactly what we wanted to do. We didn't listen to anybody. We were self-contained. We just made the exact kind of music we want to make. Anytime the record company gave us any advice or tried to tell us we should be more like this or more like that, we just ignored them. And ultimately, we did really well because ultimately people want to hear something fresh. Nobody wants to. You see people often make the mistake of copying, other bands or copying other musicians that may be, doing well at that moment. There's nothing wrong with being influenced by those people and taking things from them. That's a normal process. But when you see musicians or bands or artists try to emulate what somebody who's popular is doing, it rarely works because, a year later, what's popular now isn't popular anymore. You have to come up with something fresh and unique, and ultimately that's what turns people on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we live in an age today. I would point to modern country music. I mean, it seems very formulatic, and it's just I can't really tell the difference between a lot of the newer groups that are that are showing up. And you're starting to see some of that change in country music. It certainly happened in hard rock and heavy metal in the late 80s, early 90s. When the bands out of Seattle, when they hit the scene, everything changed almost overnight, really. I mean, it was crazy.
And that was great for us because we put our record out. Pocket Full of Kryptonite actually came out a week before Nevermind, before Nirvana Nevermind. Came out 1 week before. and when that Nirvana record came out, like you said, it really just instantaneously changed everything. It just caught on. It was fresh. People related to it, and it just all of a sudden, you realize there's all these people that like this style of music, and boom, the industry, it opened up the doors for so many bands. And even though we're not like a grunge band, but we're a rock band, and and we didn't necessarily fit into what was happening. But then all of a sudden there was, rock was popular again. And all of a sudden there was room for a band like the Spin Doctors to get on the radio and get on MTV. And it was pretty amazing. It was a really great time. And you're right. And that's all it takes is like, things go through phases and then one thing comes out and everything just shifts for a while, and, but it's always about being unique and being yourself, I mean, you can, and of course after that, there's always going to be a million copycat bands, and there's always a few that do well, and it turns into a formula, and but that's not, I've just always felt that's a bad way to go. You gotta just be you, man.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we've kind of broached the subject of Spin Doctors. Here's my question, and this is the first time you and I have ever talked. Loved, all the stuff you guys did, but I've got to ask, when you walked into the studio and you guys are getting ready to cut, what would ultimately, I guess, be your biggest single, Two Princes, it opens with a drum break, basically. Did you have any idea when you came up with that, what is it, a bar, 2 bars, a drum fill? Did you have any idea that it was going to be that huge? And if you did know that, would it have been allowed?
Well, of course you don't know that. I mean, we were just going in the studio. All we wanted to do was make a great record. We felt like we had a really good thing going. The band was tight because we used to play like 200, 250 shows a year. We just played. So by the time we got in the studio, we'd been a band 3 or 4 years, and we'd already played 1,000 gigs. So we really had our sound together, and our vibe was like, we did a little bit of pre-production, but we really just wanted to go in and capture the energy of what we were doing. And we felt like we had a really good batch of songs. And, but but you don't know it's going to be a hit. We honestly weren't thinking at all about having a hit. We were just thinking we just want to put out a killer record. This is our first record. We want to make a great record. And so the answer is no. I had no idea that song was going to be as big as it was, and I didn't really think about the drum fill. I mean, it's just a fill that I had been playing. I mean, we song for a while, and somewhere along the line, I came up with that fill, and somehow it stuck, and it just became like the intro.
Well, it's really cool. I mean, it's one of the biggest songs of the early 90s, I mean, arguably. And it starts with a drum fill, and you just don't get that a whole lot from that era. So I think it's super cool. Now, I appreciate it. No problem. Now, Spin Doctors are still active. I mean, I was, looking, and you guys actually have some dates this year. So you guys are still out there doing this stuff. Is it still as much fun as it was back then?
It's different. I mean, we've been a band. This fall, it's going to be 30 years since the band formed.
Unreal.
We've had a lot of periods throughout the years where we weren't active, where we weren't doing stuff, and we've really kind of in the last 10 years gotten busy again, and we've made a few records, and we're having a really good. The last couple of years have been great. There's a really great fan base out there. We get to go out and do great shows, and it's a lot of fun. And in some ways, I'm having more fun than ever because, after being in the music business for so long, and at this point, I've played with so many different artists outside of the band that you really appreciate having your own band, how great that is to be, your own thing. And it's all 4 original members, myself, Eric, Chris, and Mark. And although we've had our ups and downs, we're all, we're like brothers, so we get together and we have a ball, we hang out. We always have great conversations backstage, and we get up there and everybody, the band sounds as good as ever. I mean, I think everybody has gotten better over the years, and we don't fuck around. We're not one of these bands that just goes out to make a buck and just kind of floats through the set. Everybody, all 4 of us really put it out there, and we're all 4 very serious musicians. Everybody's busy outside of the band as well. And so it's a blast, I really, really appreciate it as much or more than ever at this point.
Absolutely. Well, and, I would be remiss being a Kentucky native, a proud Kentucky native, if I didn't ask about your work with Joan Osborne. I know you did some recordings with her and did some touring with Joan, and, she's from here in Kentucky.
Right.
And just, what another talent. I mean, in terms of 90s music, I mean, you've played with 2 of the biggies, tell us a little bit about some of your time with Joan.
Well, Joan's great. I've known Joan for a long time because she was on the New York City circuit. It's part of the same scene as the Spin Doctors were back in the late 80s and early 90s. We used to all play the same clubs. She'd come sit in with us. We'd sit in with her. There were some other bands like Blues Traveler on the scene and a whole bunch of bands. So I've known Joan for way back then. And then, of course, she put out her record Relish and had a big hit with that. And I guess around 1999, I did some work with her. I produced some stuff for her in my studio for her second record. And one of the songs called Baby Love, made it on that record. And then about 12 years ago, she asked me to play in her live band. So I've been really, pretty much her touring drummer for the last, better part of the last 10 years. And she doesn't always she does a lot of, more stripped down shows these days. But I've done a whole bunch of tours with her, and we just did a nice run of shows behind this. She did a really great record that I played on recently that's called Songs of Bob Dylan. And we did some shows recently, and I've done her last 3 studio records, and she's great. She's one of my favorite artists. It's been amazing working with her. It's an ongoing thing, and she's just so talented and got such a great voice. And the musicians in her band are all amazing. We're all really good friends, and it's been a really great experience, being associated with her for so long.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a huge fan of hers as well. And, she did a project a few years back with Chris Gorman from the Black Crowes, the Trigger Hippie record.
Trigger Hippie, yeah, cool.
And I mean, I listen to that thing all the time. I just really dig that stuff. She's just so talented. So
she's great, and she's always doing different stuff, and she continuously I got to hand it to her. I mean, just since I've been with her in the last 10 years, I mean, she's put out 4 records. And we're already talking about making another one. I just got an email today about trying to find some dates are all available in the summer. So she just keeps going and keeps making great stuff and doing different things. And she's great. In fact, I'm doing I'm putting out this new record of my own. It's out called Sculptures, and I'm about to turn 50, and I'm doing a big record release 50th birthday bash at the Blue Note here in New York City on April 23rd.
Awesome.
And I'm going to have a couple guests, and Joan's going to be one of my guests. So she's going to come up and do some songs with us that night. So, she's just great. I mean, I'm really honored to have her there, and I can't say enough good stuff about Joan.
No, that's fantastic. Well, you mentioned Sculptures, and I want to say thank you for allowing me to listen to the advance copy of it. And by the time we go to air with this episode of the Drum Shuffle, the record will be out. It's some really cool stuff, and I don't want to do a disservice, but tell us a little bit about it. And it's my understanding that, one of your partners in crime actually invented an instrument to play on this record. So I'm not making this up, kids. Tell us a little bit about that, Aaron.
Sure. Okay, so I just made this new record. I've been kind of working on it off and on for the last year or so, and I didn't have any pressure to finish it. I really just wanted to take my time, and I did a lot of experimenting. I recorded way more stuff than I used on the record, and kind of, I like to do more than I need and then kind of figure out how it all shapes together and pick what works, which is what I did. But so a lot of the record is, there's a couple short kind of pieces on the record that are based around me on drums and Leon Grumbaum, who plays an instrument that he invented called the Samchillion. You can look it up. If you Google Samchillion, it'll come up. And it's basically like a MIDI it basically is kind of like a weird synthesizer type instrument. He gets all kinds of crazy sounds and microtones and all kinds of weird stuff. But he basically wrote the hardware for it, and he plays it with if you look at it, it looks like a computer keyboard. And he has this language that it's just crazy. I mean, he plays, he looks like he's sitting there typing on a keyboard. It's really bizarre, but he's just amazing. And he's so creative. And I just loved, we had worked together in another band a while ago called the New York Electric Piano, which is a group I'm associated with. And I started doing some gigs with a group that I put together sometimes called the Air Conditioned Gypsies, which is kind of like a collective of musicians around here that I'll call, and we'll do these gigs. And Leon, I always use Leon. He's the one guy that I always use on the gig. And we just really vibed, and I just loved what he was doing, and I really wanted to make him an integral part of this new record. And I'm really pleased with it. It's different from my other records that I've made on my own, and it's pretty cool. I'm psyched about it.
Well, and the thing that really grabbed my attention with it was just the sonic sculpture of it, pun intended there. But, your drum sound is very unique, I would say. And it's just really cool.
Thank you.
I really liked it. And, before we got on the phone today, I was really digging on the track called The Beast. Really, digging that. And, so it's, is it fair for me to say it's a little bit of a departure from kind of your normal thing?
Well, it's definitely a departure from my previous records. And, it's just kind of like, I'm always trying to evolve as a musician, and there's so much great stuff out there. And, I think the cool thing about being a little bit older now is I've got all this experience behind me and all the influence of the people that are older than me that were always my influences growing up, like Bonham and, Bernard Purdy and Steve Gadd and Elvin Jones and Tony Williams, and the list goes on. And then you get to the point where, your own peers start to influence you. And then you get old enough, and all of a sudden there's all these badass younger guys, and there's all these new things coming up, and the influence of electronic music and hip hop and, drum machines. There's just so much out there that affects what we do, that we hear. And so, for me, it's like, you don't want to just keep doing the same thing over and over. And I've always been the type of musician that keeps my ears open and really enjoys listening to lots of things and trying to figure out what I like and what I don't like and help and try to make it my own. So I would say this record definitely had a lot of those newer influences, a little more of electronica influence and some hip hop and just some different sort of rhythmical things, And, but you try to make it your own thing. And as far as sonically, I have my own recording studio, and I share it with a great engineer named Roman Clune. So we have a really good working relationship. And, I like to try to, at least on this project, I really made a point to try to make the drum sounds different from track to track. And I wanted to make every piece have its own sort of personality, blend together, but have its own personality. And obviously the musicians I used, had a big effect. Leon, has such a unique, cool, creative, modern sound. That's a huge influence on the sound of this record. And the other guys, great guitar player named Gray McMurray, who's just fabulous, very atmospheric, really added a lot. And a great piano player named Ollie Rockberger, who's I've played with a lot here in New York, who moved back to London, but he was in town. So I built a session around him. And then also John Davis plays on some of it. He's an amazing bass player. And one of his main gigs is John Mayer. I'm sorry, not John Mayer, Jojo Mayer, Jojo's Nerve band that John's in. And, we got to play a little bit. And I really clicked with John. So, you got to listen. I mean, a lot of it is like coming up with a concept and coming up with material, and then choosing musicians that you think are going to help you, get your vision heard, and that's a lot of being a band leader and making your own records is it's just, you have to look at all these different elements to try to find where the sound is that you have in your head. And so I can't thank these guys enough for their contributions on this record.
Well, it's a really good record, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it this week. Been listening to it quite a bit, so it's
oh, cool. Thanks, man.
Oh, no problem. It really is a good record. So for everybody listening, I'm sure they can find it at your website and iTunes and all the different various outlets. So everybody check out Aaron's new record. It's really good. It's good stuff. So, are you going to hit the road with that project at all? Are you doing some shows around the city up there, or what are the plans, once the record hits the street?
I mean, I play pretty regularly with my own band. I usually play about once a month in New York City. We're actually playing Monday night, which has probably already happened by the time anybody's hearing this. And then I'm playing again at the Blue Note April 23rd. And I tend to play, fairly regularly in New York with my band, and I have kind of a steady band that I did most of my other records with, that I do most of my live shows with, which is a great band with Teddy Kumpel on guitar, Richard Hammond on bass, and then Leon on Sam Chillian, and we have different guests come and go. So to answer your question, I'm not going to go on the road, and I do some shows out of town with this band. But, the fact is like I'm so busy with other groups that take me out of town, like Spin Doctors, and I work with a German artist. I'm going over there for a month in August, and Joan and other people that it's just hard to find the time to, I would really love to do a tour with my own group at some point. I just haven't been able to find the time to do it, but it's definitely something I'd really like to do more of that. I really just have not done that up to this point.
Sure. Well, we will definitely be looking forward to the time when that happens. I think it would go over well. So let me put the bug in your ear now. Bring it down south.
It's hard to find the time for everything,
Absolutely. Well,
You know how it is?
Yeah, I do indeed. And, you've stayed really, really busy. And, here's a question that that I've always been curious about. When I was growing up, everybody said, well, if you want to play music for a living, you've got to go to one of three places: LA, New York, or Nashville, right? So you're in New York City, and I know that you stay as busy as you want to, but tell our listeners a little bit about how the scene is. Because, look, there is just a ton of monster players up there in New York. Sean Pelton immediately comes to mind. Just tons of guys. How competitive is it up there? If Jamie Eads moved to New York City tomorrow, what are the chances of my phone ringing over Sean Pelton's or Aaron Comess's, right?
No, listen, man, there's always room for good. I think any of these cities, I'll talk about New York because I live here, but there's always room for more, and there's always more people coming in every day. So it's like, that's one of the reasons I moved to New York in the first place, besides the fact that, like you said, there's kind of the big three cities for a career musician. And I never really considered Nashville to I moved. We're going back like 30 years when I was making the decision to move somewhere from Dallas. So for me, it was either going to be New York or LA. And I made the decision to come to New York. And, for two reasons. One, for the career opportunity. And two, because there's just so many great players. And so many of my heroes were here at the time. And so for me, being here now, I have the same feeling that I did then. And a lot of it comes from, like you said, like the young badass that comes to town. It's like, you got to stay on your toes, man. I don't care who you are. I don't care how much you're playing. You got to. So I just feel like I'm getting my ass kicked constantly by all these guys, and it keeps me, I want to keep growing. I want to keep getting better. I want to listen to what these guys are doing and incorporate it in my own plan. And that's the beauty of a place like this. But yeah, there's always room. I would encourage anybody who's serious, and New York's a great place. There's a lot of opportunity here. Tons of talent, tons of great music being made. And, I love it. I absolutely love it here.
Well, it's obviously just a cool scene, but you've been there for quite a number of years now, and I'm sure that you've noticed all the changes that have happened up there. I'm a rock and roll guy, and CBGB's closed down, for example. Tell us a little bit about how the music scene in New York has changed over the years. Are there young Spin Doctors type bands blowing up every day now, or is it different now, I guess is what I'm asking?
Not really. It's funny. I hear people all the time. It's usually older people like my age getting bitter and saying, oh, it used to be so great back then. Those were the good old days. But, I don't think of it like that. Yeah, things were different then. There was a lot more, I always hear stories. I moved here in '88, and I hear about how great the studio scene was, like in the '70s and '80s, like when Steve Gadd was around. And people are always talking about that. And then I moved here, and the studio scene was still happening, and there were lots of club gigs and lots of bands, and there were lots of bands getting signed. But to me, it's just like it's always changed. And if you study, New York City music scene going way back to the jazz, to the classic jazz period. It's just things change. Sure. And I think you just got to move with the changes and try to figure out how to navigate that. And rather than getting bitter and saying, "Oh, it used to be so great," you got to figure out how to make it work now. And I see people, like I said, there's tons of great bands and great artists in New York City that are playing and have big followings and do well, and people make, and you see people make a living, and also the same thing goes for just freelance, musicians. There is still there's a ton of studio work here. It's just, what you don't get is as much of the big budget records that you used to get, back then. But like I said, there's a ton of studios. I have my own studio. We're making records there all the time, and there's a whole bunch of studios, like out in Brooklyn where I live, and And there's tons of bands making records, and if somebody hires you for a session, you get paid, So it's just like, it's just different. But and the one thing that is never going to change is the cream rises to the top. It's like, you got to be really good, man. There's no shortcut. People think I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to make it, whatever that means. Okay, cool, but man, don't come here until you got your shit together, or if you want to come here to get your shit together, that's cool too. But bottom line is there's no shortcut. I mean, you got to work hard, man. You got to practice, take lessons, listen to music, keep an open mind. I mean, that's the thing is like, you look at any of the guys that are doing really well. Well, there's a couple of reasons why they're doing really well. For one, they can play really well. And they probably have their own unique thing that they're offering. We don't need 10 Aaron Comases or 10 Sean Peltons or 10 Mark Julianas or whoever. You got one's enough, right? But there's always room for somebody else that's doing something unique, because if you're doing something unique, people are going to want that, And,
absolutely.
But this is, I think people sometimes have a misconception that they can skip all the work and just go to the part where they, are doing really well. But, it never works that way. You can't skip the work,
Absolutely.
And that never stops. I mean, I just practice for 2 hours today. I try to practice every day I can, and I'm constantly playing and doing gigs, and I still take lessons, and, it's just, and that's one of the things, like, I don't know if I would have the same attitude I have now if I still lived in Dallas, but I'm up here in New York, and I'm trying to keep up with all these young badasses that are moving into town every day. So I like that. I like that challenge. It keeps me fresh,
Absolutely. Well, you've just had a prolific output over the years, and I would encourage everybody to go to your website, which is aaroncomes.com. Just look at the discography, boys and girls. It's pretty incredible. And we hope you keep putting out records for a lot of years in the future. Aaron, one of the things that we do with everybody, and I want to be respectful of your time, one of the things that we do with all of our guests on the show is we ask for your best piece of advice, for drummers, for other musicians, and it can touch on anything you want it to, but give us a good piece of advice that we can use in our day-to-day lives as musicians.
Well, I'd say there's a couple of things that I would mention, and I already kind of touched on the work ethic. I mean, there's no shortcut to this. And that goes for anything you're doing in life, whatever it is. If it's something you really want to be great at, you have to work really hard at it. You have to study. You have to put in the hours, There's no way around it. Even if you're just a natural. I mean, some people would just have a gift and, can do things really easy. Other people, it takes a little harder over time. But the fact is even the greatest people with the greatest talent, they get really great by putting in that work. And the other thing is to really keep an open mind, Don't go down the path of being bitter. Don't go down the path of putting down other people. And even if you don't like what somebody's doing, chances are, especially if they're doing well, there's a reason for it, and it may not be your thing, but you can still learn something from it. So I always try to encourage people to keep a really open mind and open ears with this stuff, and also, like, just from like a professional standpoint, I would say it's really important to, be respectful. Be respectful to the people you're working with. Be on time. Get back to people on time. Don't complain. You don't want to be the guy that shows up in the studio or shows up on the gig and it's just bitching and moaning or making things difficult, because, those guys won't get called back, and there's a lot of things that make people want to work with you. And, first and foremost, because you really offer something unique and special with your instrument. But also a lot of it is like that you're easy to be around and you make the room better. You want to be a positive force when you're in a room, especially when you're, in close quarters like musicians are. I mean, we're stuck in vans and buses and planes and studios and rehearsal rooms and backstages, and there's nothing worse than having, just somebody complain all the time or make things difficult. So I think that's a really important important thing to really think about as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. You know, it's the guys that are easiest to get along with are the guys that stay busy. I mean, it's just
And you don't have to listen. I mean, you don't have to fit. I mean, you got to be yourself. Don't try to. I've seen this mistake too. Like people trying to fit in so much that it's not genuine. You know, just be you. Don't try to come here and be somebody else. Don't feel like, the only way I'm going to get this gig is if I'm like partying with these guys. Like, you don't have to like, if that's not your thing, don't do it. I've seen that happen. Like, I want to be in this band, so I better like do drugs like they do. But that's not cool. Don't do that. Like no gig is worth being unhealthy. So I mean, just make good decisions and make decisions for yourself. The other last thing I want to say about that is like, think about what it is you want to do. Like it's important to make the right choices. I would say like I come from the school of being prepared. When I was younger, I generally had a lot of different interests and a lot of different styles, and I really wanted to be a lot of different guys. I wanted to be a jazz guy. I wanted to be a guy in a rock band. I wanted to be a studio guy. But you can't always do all those things all the time. And I made a decision after I had been to town for a while and I got into Spin Doctors. I made a decision. I'm going to give this band like a year or two. I think this seems to be a good opportunity for me. It's it's a very creative situation for me. And I made a decision to give that a shot. If had that not worked out, I would have moved on to something else. But, think about what you're doing and make your decisions based on creativity. Don't make them based on money. Because usually if you're just trying to make money, you're going to wake up 10, 15 years down the line and maybe you paid the bills, but you didn't do it. You might not be satisfied. And obviously that's a reality. We all have to pay our bills, and sometimes you got to take gigs that you might not want to do that might not be the most creative, but be careful about getting sucked into that to the point where it takes away from what you really started playing, your instrument for, so I think just putting in the work and making the right decisions as you move along your life are really, really important.
Absolutely. Well, that's just absolutely fantastic advice, and we appreciate it so much. Aaron, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the Drum Shuffle crowd?
Listen, man, just thanks for listening. Anybody that sat here and listened to this thing, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to us talk, and just practice.
Yeah.
Get out, go home and practice, man, and play with people. It's got to be a good combination of doing the work by yourself and then forgetting about what you did and going making music. Ultimately, it's about making music. So I'm a big fan of practicing. I like to work on things that I'm not good at. I always say if you sound good when you're practicing, you're probably not really getting anything done. So frustration is a good thing when you're practicing. But when you get on the bandstand or in the studio or you're making music, don't think about what you practice. That's like, it's like muscle memory. You do that so when you get on your instrument in a musical situation, you can make music comfortably. But you don't want to go in there and be playing the things that you've been practicing. That's not what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, God knows you're making a lot of music. I jokingly said that if I had you on every time you appeared as a drummer in liner notes, we would have you on every week. So, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really do appreciate it. Open invitation. Anytime you want to come back and talk with us, we would absolutely love to have you. Everybody go check out Sculptures by Aaron Comess. You can find it on his website, aaroncomess.com. Aaron, again, thanks so much, and we'll see you out there real quick.
Hey, man, great talking to you. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of the Drum Shuffle. This has been episode number 10. I want to thank Aaron again for his time and coming on and talking about his record and his career. We really appreciated having him on the show today. As always, I'm going to ask a favor from each of you. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button to whatever service you're using to listen in today. Also, leave us a rating or review on whatever platform you're using. It helps us tremendously. Keep your emails coming to the Drum Shuffle Podcast at gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can find me at jamieeads.com. So until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers.